Good morning and good evening, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today at today's webinar, where we will be talking about the measurement methodology, which was developed by numerous colleagues throughout the last year. Sahil, if you can change the slide, please, we can already start. Thank you. As you know, we have held our press conference yesterday, during which we've launched the guidance documents produced by all the work streams throughout the course of 2023. And we, of course, hope that all these documents will be used widely by all signatories as well as supporters of the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative. Today, we have over 640 registered stakeholders from 60 countries within the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative, and we're still growing on a daily basis. Next slide, Sahil, please. You might have seen the slide already yesterday. The launch of the guidance documents is obviously a key milestone from us. From the moment the initiative was created in 2021, we have been building a solid foundation around content and methodologies. And having achieved this, we're now able to launch a new chapter for the project. So, of course, starting from next year, we will much more focus on practical implementation of the guidance documents, including measurement, which we will be talking about today, as well as, of course, reporting, activation, and adaptation. And we will also focus more on communication and education. This will be undoubtedly very exciting times for the project, since we will also be able to observe how our signatories and supporters implement these methodologies in practice. So thank you once again for joining here. And at this moment, on behalf of the initiative, I would like to thank all of you, dear stakeholders, for being part of this initiative. Supporting us and driving the topic of sustainability forward. We, of course, thank also a huge thank goes to more than 100 colleagues from the industry who were actively involved in last year's work developing all these guidance documents. This is really a great job which has been done. So on behalf of the initiative, thank you from all of us as well. And on the next two slides, we would also like to share with you the financial contributors. Of course, a big thank you to all of you as well. Without you, this initiative will not be able to be where it is today. Thank you very much for this. And of course, if your company would like to contribute financially to the success of the initiative, very welcome. We will be happy to support you here as well. So today's webinar is, of course, about the measurement. And before I give the floor to Christian, I would like to show you that you still can register to other webinars, which we will be holding throughout this week and next week. So we're very welcome to still register. And we will be recording these webinars so that those who were unable to participate can watch them anytime. Furthermore, we, of course, invite you to use the Q&A function in this webinar room. Johanna kindly agreed to handle these questions. So we will be, of course, opening the floor to all of your questions after the presentation. So one more time, thank you so much for all of you for your hard work, especially to the one of the measurement team. And Christian, I am giving the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Alex and Joanna for handling the Q&A in the background. And hello, everybody. So I'm Christian Druard. I work for UFI, and I'm very happy to represent the Net Zero Carbon Events measurement workstream today, as we are releasing our methodology. We are going to have 3 slots from now on. I will make a short introduction to provide the overall status of where we stood before this release, where we stand now, thanks to this release, and also what the next steps are. I will then hand over to Eric and Sahil from Greenview, who will present the methodology in more detail. And then we will jointly answer questions. But first, a few words to explain how we have been conducted the work in the last year to deliver this 93-page methodology document. Next slide, please, Sahil. Thank you. So as you can read on this slide, this methodology is the result of an extensive process that included an analysis of existing resources and series of drafting and feedback rounds. Next slide, please. So 48 resources were analyzed to identify the existing emission categories, the emission factors, and current gaps. We built the methodology step by step, and that included 7 workstream meetings, 4 formal feedback rounds, and many individual calls. A call for data was also launched to help building assumptions and try to create coefficients. Next slide, please. All this was made possible thanks to the commitment of members of our workstream, listed there. As you probably realize now, this whole initiative is built by the industry and for the whole industry. So bringing such a range of expertise is key. Behind those company names, you find many individuals who have truly provided questions, remarks, propositions, discussions, reviews, and their names are rightly mentioned in the methodology. I believe several of them are with us today, and thank you directly to them. I'm not going to list everybody, but I will take the time to emphasize the key role of Greenview. Greenview has provided or is providing the technical assistance to the whole initiative, and their dedication to the project day and night, if you count Joanna in the US and Sahil in Singapore, is really remarkable. Just be aware that in addition to drafting the initial considerations that we then turned into what we called key methodology inputs, and then the different versions of the methodology, they replied individually to anyone who had provided a question or a comment during the process. So really to Greenview and all other members of the workstream involved, a huge thank you. Next slide, please. So first, a bit of flashback to understand where we stood before today. The analysis conducted, no, can we remain on that one, please? Yes. The analysis conducted revealed the need for those 5 key aspects. You can read them. We needed to define a firm scientific basis. There was a need for education, simplification, to create a common approach, and also to accelerate the transition for the whole industry. So next slide now, please. So more precisely, there was a lack of knowledge about which activities constitute the carbon footprint of events and which ones are most powerful, impactful. There was also a lack of measurement cohesion across the industry, both for tools and industry stakeholders, and as a result, a lack of comparability. There was a difficulty in data sharing based on the diversity of industry stakeholders, a lack of space for learnings of individual companies to be shared. Organizations who were beginning measurement process often encountered similar issues, slowing down the process, the speed of progress, of industry as a whole. And emission measurement was primarily based on the GHG protocol corporate reporting standard, while an event behaves more like a product, and more will be explained later on that. Next slide, please. So how does this edition of the methodology help? It supports signatories in meeting all commitments of the net zero carbon events pledge as a starting point for measurement. It provides guidance on measurement for the 9 main identified emission source categories. And of course, this remains subject to each organization analysis on materiality and boundaries. It is based on the GHG product life cycle accounting and reporting standard, and Sahil will explain why this is more appropriate. It introduces a 3-tier system that enables a starting journey for measuring events and addresses each entity's net zero journey from beginner to advanced. Sometimes we hear, oh, you're not ambitious enough. Well, anyone ambitious or who's top of the class is an advanced in our classification. And then the methodology already includes, where possible, granular and specific metrics, formulae, and flowcharts to assist making calculations required for reporting. Next slide, please. But first, I also want to cover, just to make sure we have time to cover this today, what the future looks like. So in this slide, you will find listed what we realize we know is not in the current version of the methodology, and this is why we call it first edition. So the first point is stakeholder control and responsibility of each emission source category. In fact, this was already touched on in the roadmap, so it's more of a linking to be made. Coefficient and proxy data, this is a key point. We would have wanted to deliver that. We made a call for data. We are not yet ready, but we'll be focusing on that very quickly, because it's probably a game changer for many. Specific emission sources, but we know exactly which ones they are, related to water and embodied carbon of buildings. Timeline considerations for the 3 measurement tiers. In fact, we'd drafted some, but then we didn't reach a consensus on that within the group, so we decided to leave them for now. Same, we will need to develop a proposition for baseline in terms of years for emission categories. And we have a few materials areas where we need to provide a portion of those. Here again, it's more that we didn't have the time to include them in this edition. Next slide, please, Sahil. And I think this is the last one before I hand over to Eric. A quick word to share that now that the 8 individual work streams have delivered their work, the initiative moves into an implementation part, as Alex was saying, and the overall structure and workflows will be reviewed. So measurement will no longer stand alone, but it will be merged with reporting, and will also cover verification. As such, this pole shall maintain industry measurement methodology and related updates to the content and data. And this includes rolling out and integrating the full event level measurement methodology across industry frameworks and tools, and also developing database management and exchange services when appropriate. It should also support embedding of net zero carbon events approach and methodology in other related industry initiatives, standards, and certifications. And the fact is that we see many of them And so there is a need to align and really make sure that the net zero carbon events remains the backbone for our industry. We shall also cover signatory and consolidated industry reporting by carrying out technical evaluation and monitoring of signatory process and reporting status. So this is a quick update, and more will be announced after we've heard the outputs of other work streams. But with this introduction now done, I'm very pleased to hand over to Greenview and Eric to start with. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Christian. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you at this moment, this inflection point, as Christian mentioned, when we move into this next step, because the most exciting results of this is that we are ready for a next step. As those who have been in the initiative and in sustainability for some time now will recognize, it's an immense challenge to arrive at something that is common, something that is industry developed, that is hashed out among practitioners of all different levels, to put aside differences and to arrive at something that can be used as an industry-wide starting point for catalyzing and synergizing, because that's been recognized. We're coming off of the heels of COP right now in Dubai, and we know there is this need. And the NZCE really is this initiative to help advance and further various aspects, which is most important because this methodology is not developed in isolation. As mentioned, it's one of 8 work streams of those in the industry across all parts of the value chain to come together to put together an event and decarbonize it. And so now we can move forward with improving methodology, improving data, improving resources, and taking those next steps. And so that's the most exciting. In order to get there, it was an immense amount of work, as was mentioned, among not just us, but everybody else, to truly develop this collectively and ensure that it's going to meet the needs of those who are just getting started to those who really want to keep pushing and advancing the bar for the industry. And so I'll turn it over, and it's been, of course, my 2 colleagues, Sahel and Johanna, who have worked tirelessly with many of you on the call and engaged to make sure that we take into consideration the opinions, the needs, and the views on how this should be done to arrive at a collective path forward. And so, as Christian mentioned, there are many things that can now be improved upon this, things that can be tackled, issues that were parked. We have a base and we can go from there. And so we'll dive into all of those specific parts. And I would encourage all of you practitioners in this next phase of implementing on your pledge of measuring, reporting, supporting this initiative with data, supporting with expertise, with experience to improve it. Think about how the aspects that we're putting forth now can serve you, and as well, how can you use them? And then how can we make them better going forward? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Sahel to take you into the in-depth look at the methodology.
All right, thank you, Eric. And hello, everyone. I'm Sahil Agarwal from Greenview. I'll now be sharing a little bit about what the methodology covers, its contents, and we'll be taking you in a little bit more detail about it. So first here, we just want to say that the methodology is an extensive document and it's quite comprehensive. It covers all information source categories that are deemed material for events, while the methodology gives a lot of detailed guidance and touches on various aspects. It may be that not all information included will be relevant to all event stakeholders and organizations. So it is recommended that organizations should take the guidance given and determine their materiality, draw their boundaries, and then also use this methodology as a resource for guidance on measuring specific emission sources. So in this slide here, I just want to share, because this is an event level methodology, so there are 9 key emission source categories that were identified as important to be measured for events, which you can see on the screen. So the first one is production and materials. So here we have given guidance on upstream emissions from the various materials used in the production stage of an event, such as stand materials, signages, furniture, AV equipment, etc. Second one is freight and logistics. So here we have tried to cover the emissions from vehicles used in the transportation and logistics of goods for events. Third is food and beverage. Here we've tried to capture the quantification of upstream emissions from procuring F&B items for the event. Then the very key and a very important one for the event industry is the travel to and from the destination. So capturing the emissions from attendees, air or land or sea-based travel when they come to the event. So that's what's captured here. Then also local transportation, emissions from the local transportation activities within the destination that attendees are involved in, such as travel from their hotel to venue and back, and etc. So that is another key area that we have included. Then the next one is accommodation. So we have given guidance on how to quantify emissions from hotel stays. And here we have tried to make this guidance in line with the hotel industry's methodology, which is called as HCMI. So we have tried to follow that and given guidance on using the existing work that the hotel industry has already done on the quantification of accommodation emissions. Then next is energy. So we provided guidance here on how to quantify emissions from energy used at event venues. Then second last is waste. So guidance on emissions from the disposal of waste that is generated at events. And finally, digital content and communication. So basically emissions from the various digital pieces that may be involved in the event, like for example, sending out emails, registration forms. So how to quantify emissions from these various little pieces has also been included. So you can see it is quite comprehensive, and the list is covering majorly all the emission source categories of an event. Now, why we included these 9 and why we named it as such. So we had already explained, like Christian had already explained, that we had gone through several rounds of consultations, and this was based on an extensive research of existing practices and looking at what the existing tools are and methodologies are. And based on this, we at all, as a work stream, agreed on these 9 emission sources and used them. The methodology has a lot of intricate details on quantification of each of these 9 emission source categories, which I'll share in a slide later, that what all is covered within these 9 specific emission categories. So next in the slide, I want to point out that this version of the methodology restricts its focus on how to quantify event level emissions. And as Christian had already also explained, that we did not want to get into the stakeholder responsibilities in this first edition, because the previous NZCE phases of the roadmap had already outlined stakeholder responsibilities. And in fact, we had already done a prioritization activity for each action area in the roadmap. Therefore, we did not want to reinvent the wheel and wanted to refer to the existing work that has already been done in the previous years. Then also in the NZCE roadmap, we had come up with 5 action areas. So we had intentionally aligned the 9 emission source categories with these 5 action areas. So you can see that the first action area, which is power events efficiently with clean renewable energy, that's aligned with the energy emission source category. The second action area, which is redesign events to utilize sustainable materials and be waste-free. So here, this action area is aligned with 3 emission source categories, which are production and materials, waste, and digital event and communication. Then the third action area, which is the source food sustainably and eliminate food waste. This is aligned with our emission source category called as food and beverage. The fourth action area is to move goods and equipment efficiently and transition to zero emissions logistics. This is with the freight and logistics. And finally, the last action area, which is work with and influence partners in the travel sector to reduce and mitigate the emissions of travel to events. So here, like I was showing you in the 9 categories, the emission source categories that are aligned here with this action area are local transportation, travel to and from the destination, and accommodation. So we had intentionally wanted to align these 2 documents of the roadmap and the measurement methodology here. Now, in this next slide here, we are trying to show an event boundary. And just a bit of a context to which Christian had also provided some context, that when we were developing this methodology for event level emissions, we had decided to align the methodology with the GHG protocol's life cycle accounting and reporting standard, and not the corporate standard, which we probably have used traditionally for our companies. And the reason being that delivery of an event is analogous to a finished product or a service which has different stages, interconnected phases, and stages. So for example, for event, we determine these stages as pre-event, event, and post-event. Then within these 3 stages, you can see that the 9 emission source categories can overlap across each other. And just one important thing to note here is that the boundary shown may not be representative for all the different types of events or all the different types of activities, because we know that each event is different, and there are a lot of different types of activities that are involved in an event, and they may occur at different instances. So again, it is recommended here that the users of the methodology can adapt this boundary, and they can adapt this for their own specific needs or for their own specific event, depending on the size and scale and type of event. So we'll move to the next slide here. So as I mentioned earlier, we had the 9 emission source categories. So here I just wanted to share what type of information is covered in each of the 9 emission source categories, and what are we trying to, what the contents are. So the first is, for each of these 9 emission source categories, the first is information about impact and measurement challenges. So we know that not each of the 9 emission source categories are easily quantifiable. Therefore, we wanted to give context on the challenges that take place practically when we quantify these emissions, and also the impact that each of these category has on the overall footprint. Then second is information about what's being measured. So for example, energy. Is it only energy being used at venues that should be measured? Or should it also be an offsite? For example, an offsite event takes place after the event. Should the energy consumption from that offsite event also be measured here? So such type of intricacies and details we have provided in this guidance for each of the categories. Then the next is what type of primary data is needed to be collected and in order to quantify emissions. Then next is how you convert the primary data to emissions. What is the formula used? So that's the next part in the section. Then next is to convert to emissions, you need specific emission factors. So what are those sources of emission factors that you need to quantify? So in this methodology, what we have done is we have followed a hierarchy of emission factor sources. And these hierarchy is NZCE's highly recommended emission factor sources, NZCE's recommended emission factor sources, and there are some additional ones. So just one important point to make here is that what happens if a company is bound by their national or local regulation to use a specific emission factor? So in this case, should they be using an emission factor recommended by NZCE, or should they be using an emission factor mandated by their national or local regulation? So in such cases, we have made it quite clear in the methodology that such companies may continue to use the emission factors by the national or their local regulation, and then follow the guidance for compliance and continue to follow the guidance for their compliance and reporting. Then next is what if the company does not have primary data? So what are the types of secondary data examples that you can use? So we've tried to give guidance on some secondary data examples and considerations on what type of secondary data you can look for when quantifying these 9 emission source categories. The next is measurement tiers. So I'll talk a little bit more about this particular measurement tiers in the next slide. Then the next one is apportionment consideration. So here we have established that apportioning is actually inherent in the emissions calculations for many different industries. So for example, in the hotel industry, apportioning of emissions is done when multiple hotels, they send their laundry to an outsourced vendor. So there an apportioning is needed for their total emissions. Then even in the finance industry, apportioning is needed because when an investor wants to calculate its share of a particular investee's emissions, so they have to use an apportionment factor or an allocation factor. So same thing for the event industry. For example, if there are 2 events that are taking place same time at a venue, so how do you apportion the energy consumption of your event? So we've tried to give some guidance around this. And as Christian had also explained, that we will further expand on this on various specific items. We'll further provide more guidance on apportionment on some specific areas in the subsequent versions of the methodology. Then lastly, we have tried to give as many examples as possible so that it helps the users to understand how the calculation works or how the numbers work. So there are a lot of illustrative examples in the methodology throughout also, and then at the end of the methodology as well. So moving on to the next slide. As I was mentioning, the 3 tiers of measurement system. So the methodology has introduced a 3-tier measurement system. And the reason for this is we have acknowledged that different entities are at different starting points in their net zero journey. So the methodology understands the importance of primary data. And at the same time, it also gives you that flexibility to use secondary data and proxies. So here, as you can see, that we have 3 tiers: basic, intermediate, and advanced. And the differences between the 3 are mainly on how you quantify based on primary or secondary data, and also based on the quality of data. So this type of system, 3-tier system, we have tried to integrate into the methodology so that this methodology becomes flexible for every type of company or user who is in various points of their net zero journey. Now, coming to the next slide, which is key event level metrics. So the methodology has given some common metrics that may be used for reporting when event level emissions. It's important to note here that providing guidance or providing these metrics does not necessarily mean that companies will now be mandated to report on each and every single metric that we are showing here. Basically, the idea was to show these metrics as a guidance format and for reference format. In cases there are event level metrics or event level reporting is common. So if I can just quickly go through some of these key event level metrics. So it's divided into 3 main sections. So the first is the general information, general event information section. So here we have tried to cover metrics around what you need when you are reporting on general event related information, such as name of event, date, country, number of attendees, floor area, both gross surface area and net surface area. Also event type, whether it's a conference, whether it's an incentive event or an exhibition event. So what type of event it is. Then next is the event industry. So what type of industry the event is, whether it's a fashion event industry or a retail industry, etc. And then also event reach, whether it's an international event or domestic event. Now, why we have included these, because from our analysis and from our conversations and consultations, we have discussed that an event industry type and its reach can significantly vary the emissions. And international events may have significantly higher emissions because a lot of travel is involved as compared to an event which is domestic. So that's why we try to cover and capture these types of metrics as well when for general event level information. Then the second section in the metrics is for each of the 9 emission category. So starting with the production and materials. So first is, for example, things like what is the weight of materials or the furniture and the types used. Also the amount spent on purchases and rentals. For freight and logistics, we have tried to cover things such as distance the shipment has traveled by different modes of transport, the weight or volume of the shipment. Then next is food and beverage. So here we have tried to capture the number or weight of ingredients used, the number or weight of meals provided, the number or weight of different F&B items procured, and also the amount spent on catering. Then here, which is the next one, is the travel to and from the destination, which is a key category. So here we've tried to capture mode of transport, fuel consumption, distance travel, and etc. In the next slide, there is local transportation. So again, the local transportation, the metrics here is quite similar to the travel to and from the destination, which is mode of transport, fuel, and distance. Then next is energy. So here, metrics such as amount of total energy used, amount of total energy which comes from renewable sources, things like that. Then accommodation, what are the total room nights for each accommodation type and location. Again, these things are important because they can change the emission factors, or they can also change the secondary data. So that's why these metrics by location, by type are also quite key. Then the next one is waste. So total waste generated by a different material type and the disposal method. And then last is the digital content and communication. So things such as the number of website searches or number of email sent and all of that. So that was the second section in the metrics. There's the last section, which is when you're aggregating each and every of the 9 emission source categories. So the next is the metric is the total emissions. And you can report your total emissions of the event in absolute format, which is in kg CO2e, or you can use an intensity or denominator factor which basically divides your total emissions by per attendee or by per meter square if it's area that's being used. And then the same thing for each category. So total emissions for each category in terms of absolute and in terms of intensity, which is per attendee or per area used meter square. And then also important is the percentage of total emissions, because it's really important to know what percentage of the total emissions is that category that represents to the overall footprint of the event. So, sorry, one more slide. So in addition to all that we have talked about the methodology and also the guidance given, so we have also covered guidance on some other areas. So first is key event level metrics, which I had already shown you. The next is multiple event extrapolation. So we have given guidance on this. For example, if you work or if you organize multiple events and you have data for some events, and if you don't have data for other events, so how can you extrapolate data from those other events? So there's some basic guidance given on that. Then baseline considerations. So if a company wants to set event level baselines, then some simple basic guidance is given around that as well, although we have seen that event level baselines are usually not that common. Then next is process roadmaps, and this is basically an optional item where we have taken it from the GHG protocol lifecycle standard, where they say that to create process maps for a product or a service, in this case, it's an event. And then finally, it's radiative forcing emissions associated with air travel, because we know that travel is the largest footprint of an event's emissions, and it is very key to our industry. So we have given a lot of guidance around radiative forcing, on what it is, how do you calculate it, what you need to do if you don't know how to, and what you need to disclose on radiative forcing. So yeah, there's a lot of guidance on this. And I think the next slide. So I think, yeah, that's it. With this, I can just say that the methodology is quite exhaustive, quite comprehensive. And we would really appreciate like if practitioners like yourselves can use this methodology. And we are also very open for feedback so that we can use it to further evolve and further refine this methodology document in subsequent years. And yeah, thank you very much for your support for joining this webinar. And I think for the remaining time, we can take a few questions, and I will pass it back to my colleagues to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sahil and Eric. But before we start the question and answers, I would like to mention a mistake in the deck, unfortunately. When we listed the companies who were involved in the workstream, we forgot the letter A with American Express Global Business Travel, and we really will be adding them. We especially mentioned in the report document that Eloisa had been helping us so much, especially in this radiative forcing issue, in fact, that it's only fair to make this correction as quickly as possible. And sorry, Eloisa, if you're with us today. Good. I'll then pass on to you, Joanna, to let us know if you had any questions and who you believe should be answering them.
So I'm just seeing that there's a question from Ben about whether we have considered any carbon accounting tools that might assist with the measurement process. So first of all, there have definitely been carbon accounting tools that were part of that initial resources analysis that Christian mentioned in the very beginning. To what we have been able to find, there's not one tool, like Christian mentioned, that captures all emission source categories in the same way that we have now identified as best practice in the methodology document. Our hope is, of course, that now that we've come together as an industry and defined these approaches, that the methodology will then be used by tools in order to really make these different outcomes comparable, because right now they are not. So I hope that that answers the question.
And I may add that in our work streams, we had several companies who are building tools, and so they did see the benefit in putting all this together, and I'm sure they will be adapting their tools accordingly.
Besides that, right now we don't have any questions, so definitely feel free. We still have some time left in this meeting, so if anything is unclear, but we of course also are aware that it's quite an expansive document. All right, Eloisa, great presentation, thank you. Do you have an idea of the governance structure you are considering for next steps and timeline? I will probably hand it over to either Alex or Christian for this, because that's more of a larger net zero carbon events question.
Well, I can start maybe by just referring to this workstream, measurement workstream. I've mentioned in one of the slides that we were going to combine that one with another workstream, which was reporting. So that was referring to the individual reporting from each signatory of the pledge, but also with the idea of consolidating all this at industry level. And there is this question of validation of data, which will also be tackled within this new poll. We do consider two other polls, but I'm going to let Alex explain that. And we will be communicating all this anyway to all supporters of the initiative, and primarily those who have been involved in the work streams like you, Eloisa, as soon as this is completely validated. Alex, you want to add something?
Exactly, Christian. So thanks for this contribution already. And indeed, you're all aware, being a signatory, that we're now running our reporting, which we already have quite a lot of responses from the signatories, and we see that especially smaller companies struggle with understanding how to basically report on the sustainability, and we are already helping out quite a few of them. So all this will be more embedded into the reporting as of next year in the next cycle. And as Christian mentioned, we will be combining also the elements of measurement and verification in this as well.
Right. Then we've got another question from Ben, who's asking about corporate emissions in addition to event emissions. And maybe I can just take this one over first. So ultimately, like I think Christian mentioned in the very beginning, for corporate emissions, the corporate reporting standard of the GHG protocol is what applies. And so we really focused on only the event level emissions, just based on the fact that there was little to no guidance on this previously available. So that's the best resource to go to for the corporate emissions. Now, most of the time, not always, depending on what kind of stakeholder you are, but most of the time, your event level emissions will probably feed into your scope 3 emissions. Once again, not for all stakeholders, because depending on which stakeholder you are, you might have immediate emissions or direct emissions with this. I see Eric unmuted himself, so I'm going to give it to him.
Yeah, this is one of the common questions that came up. I think reiterating what Joanna said is what we wanted to do in order to solve the main issue of measurement is recognize that at its heart, an event has emissions. And we wanted to document, identify all of the sources of emissions in an event, from which how those break out in terms of responsibility, of scope, and other aspects will be dependent on every stakeholder, partner, and the specific event. Which is why, in order to make sure we at least at a base know what there is, we structured this around the GHG product lifecycle standard, and taking an event as a product or a service itself, so that the context will be there for, hey, look, here are the emissions of the events. Now let's from there understand how you allocate those for every company in their own respective reporting. So that's where this takes, because that way we leave the corporate work, which is going to be highly nuanced to every single company, to be able to build off of this, but not to use it as its first guide. In the roadmap of NZCE and the pledge, that the pledge is actually for the signatory for their company to pursue net zero. And so this is helping supplement that from the roadmap development.
All right, then we've got a comment. I think this is just a response to what you were saying before from Eloisa. Thanks, Christian and Alex. I believe the data and proxy will be a very important and valuable part of the next steps. I suggest benchmarking to be incorporated as well. We're going to note this down. And
yeah, and I just want to add, thank you, Eloisa, but I completely agree with you on that. And again, I was hoping to get that done this year, but it's also a huge exercise. And what we've received so far, unfortunately, wasn't wide enough. But we will probably start as quickly as possible now with whatever we've got, and the idea to self-enrich the system. Whether we'll go into benchmarking will, I think, depend on the reliability of the data. We'll have to be to secure things before we can start showing things. But I know we've done that for other initiatives, examples in the past, so we know how to do it. It's just a question of putting it together and really starting with the exercise with as many cases as possible. And right now we could wait a little. We decided we needed to wait a little bit. So we'll be putting the emphasis very quickly, early 2024, to get a bit more data, and then we'll produce something. Do you want to add something on this, Eric? Because that's also something you're very familiar with, and you're in the position to assess or confirm where we are and when we can start.
Well, we can start today. I think the important thing is mentioned, these data sets, these coefficients, they're built and strengthened over time. And they're decades long work in a lot of industries and a lot of initiatives. And so, as mentioned, it was very clear and apparent from this work that this was still nascent to a point where we could develop coefficients. So that's going to be the intention of this next round, is to get those so that they can then be further strengthened. That's because the alternative is to make very generic coefficients, but then those ultimately would get supplanted at some point. And so rather than have a potentially misconstrued coefficient or representative number of an emission that would be then used in perpetuity, the choice is to come with the methodology and work with those who are pledges and signatories on their pathways and the reporting to then help generate more coefficients that are based on actual data.
Right. So then we have another comment from Brazil. First of all, thank you. And we're happy to see that you want to use the net zero carbon events work for creating awareness. So when it comes to examples, because you're asking whether those could be used as examples for awareness creation, we have quite a few examples in the methodology. Like Sahil said, we have both on each individual section an example for each emission source category. And then we also have the full event calculation. We have 2 of those. So I do think that you're going to be able to find the examples in there that will be most applicable for the stakeholders that you're talking to. And ultimately, of course, this is really just to show how to apply the measurement guidance that we've included in the whole measurement methodology. Hope that answers the question. Okay, and then we've got 2 more questions right now. So there is one question that is asking whether it is possible to elaborate more on the extrapolation process, for example, when calculating emissions for exhibition events. Sahil, do you want to take this over?
Yeah, so currently, so it's a good question, but so currently in the methodology, what we have is a multiple level event extrapolation. So if, for example, let's say an organizer organizes multiple events. So for some events, they might have data on emissions, for others, they might not. So in that particular section, what the guidance is about is how you can estimate emissions for those for which we do not have data. And there's a lot of guidance given on how you can first group. So there's a lot of grouping requirements and guidance given on how you can group the events based on their type or based on their location, and then develop internal coefficients and then use that to extrapolate for the remaining events. So there's a lot of guidance given. So I think you could go and check that section out. Hopefully should be able to answer your question on that.
Okay, and then we've got 2 questions from Yashi, which I think are somewhat related. So first, for the roadmap, can we confirm that the GHG corporate guidance should be used? And then also, is there guidance for the path to net zero? So regarding the guidance for the path to net zero, we didn't include more information about this in the methodology because the roadmap outlines the path to net zero for the events industry overall. And then we have the guidance documents that were created by each of the other work streams now to really get started on that journey to net zero. For the GHG corporate guidance, I'm not sure if do you mean the roadmap or the reporting? Because like Eric said, when it comes to the reporting, it's going to be for the companies. So then for the scope 1 and 2 and 3, you're going to be using the GHG corporate guidance, yes. But when it comes to including event level emissions, we're of course hoping that the measurement methodology that we've now come up with will be used. Happy to give a floor to anyone else from the team if you want to chime in. Cool. All right. I think that right now that seems to be all of the questions. Is there anyone else who has a remaining question? We still have a couple of minutes.
Everything seems to be very clear, Johanna.
Perfect. Then I will give it back to you, Alex.
Yeah, and of course, thank you very much, Christian and Greenview team for all this, for guiding the work stream to where we are today. This is extremely important for the whole industry, and we really hope that it will be used widely. In case you have any further questions, don't worry, we're not running away. You can always reach us on the email which you see now on the screen, info@netzerocarbonevents.org. Very welcome to drop any questions which you might have, even if you think they might be silly or anything. Just don't be afraid. We're definitely quite accessible and happy to answer everything. We know that especially smaller companies have troubles to understand sustainability. So as I always say, our door is always open. So please do contact us. We will be sharing this recording with all of you at a later stage when it will be uploaded. We hope that this will be done pretty quickly. And we already wish you a very good pre-holiday season. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Very important, and we will be, of course, there for you in case you have anything which you might have forgotten today. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.